We have, of course, so many things that have been taking place. We have this recent fiscal cliff discussion and negotiation that was taking place. And we also have now what's going on with Chuck Hagel, of course. And then we have not the fiscal cliff, but the debt ceiling debacle that is ahead of us. We got a cliff and a debacle, so things can't be good. But thought it'd be a good idea to bring in Alan Kelly. Alan, of course, CEO, founder of Playmaker Systems, who has joined us quite often, even more often during the campaign, but joins us this morning as we talk about the plays that have been run. Good morning, Alan.
Guten Morgen.
Happy New Year. Yes. Good morning, indeed.
Yeah, Hegel. Okay.
I thought I should maybe even have a little music to go along with that. But I don't think so. I couldn't resist. I saw that, and I don't know how many people make the connection. I don't know why it jumped into my head. So,
Tim, you're just on fire this morning.
No,
Let's go.
That's my play. Anyway, all right. So, what did you make of this whole thing? I mean, and I know that for people who don't know, Alan also writes, and one of the things he's posted recently, which I thought was kind of interesting, it's looking at the Lincoln movie and the 13th Amendment and the fiscal cliff and making some comparisons. But just overall, I mean, this is quite an interesting series of plays.
Well, there is an obvious, parallelism going on between the great legislative fight in the movie Lincoln and the fiscal cliff. One is sort of reconstructive, one is deconstructive, I guess. But either way, their influence strategies abounding in this. And I thought I would take the challenge of a lawyer friend of mine and see if I could maybe jot out what those might be. And I've got 4 or 5 examples. Should we go through them?
Sure, let's do that. Let's talk about, first of all, I guess, the jam, which is what? Describe that for people who are just new to the conversation, because we got a lot of new listeners now.
Okay, well, this is a play that is dead center in our system of 24 influence strategies. You might think of this as a periodic table of politics or political spin. And the jam is a freezing play. It's in that category. And the way you define it is to gum up the works, the disabling or disorganizing of a player's activities or communications. What we often see with the jam right now is essentially like a kid who takes his football and goes home. He folds his arm, he says no. And it is to stop the process, to freeze a process from commencing. So in the case of in the case of the Lincoln movie, you probably had a jammer, to coin a phrase, in the form of Fernando Wood, the New York congressman who's played by Lee Pace. And he was a Democratic copperhead who opposed the war and supported slavery. So there's a jammer there in the movie Lincoln. Well, his counterpart, you might say, would be in the form of the Tea Party caucus, which has held the line for entitlement reform, debt reduction, and more. So you got jams, 175 years ago, you got jams today.
We have also something that we talked a lot about during the campaign, Alan Kelly, and that's the people who, as you describe it, carry the water, the surrogates who go out there and try to make the position known on behalf of in this case, I guess, the president. So in the movie, for people who have watched Lincoln, I have not yet seen the movie, by the way, I'll confess to that. But whoever helped the president make his case, you say, was Preston Blair?
Yeah, Preston Blair, played by Hal Holbrook, was kind of a kingmaker. He was a heavyweight, insider heavyweight of sorts, and and he was there behind Lincoln as a type of surrogate that we call a partner. To get geeky, in my view, there are 3 types of surrogates. There's partners, there's proxies, and there's a third kind that we'll talk about in a second called a plant. But Preston Blair was very much in the background and did things for Lincoln that he couldn't do himself. Now, to use a contemporary example, you might think of Warren Buffett, who operates very much in his own sphere on his own, still in all helping Obama work the wealthy to accept higher taxes.
Look at me, I'm one of those. I don't mind. And
that's right.
Frankly, my secretary pays more proportionally in taxes than I do. Why should she?
That's right. And Preston Blair, some years ago, was saying, to his contemporaries, the 13th Amendment does have merit. Let's think about it, and so on and so forth. Those are things he can say to his constituents and peers that Abraham Lincoln just simply simply couldn't.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned The Plant, which is another kind of a surrogate in a way. And W.N. Bilbo was the part played by James Spader, who'd had, by the way, a great interview with Julie Mason here on POTUS. And it was interesting when he described, and he was kind of an unknown quantity for a lot of people before they saw this movie, but he was the arm twister. And I wonder, although you don't identify a particular backroom worker for President Obama, how would you characterize the work that Vice President Biden did with the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell to craft that deal at the last minute?
Great question. I would probably say that Vice President Biden operated as a proxy. Meaning that the definition of a proxy is a hired gun, a surrogate who advocates for another player or that player's agenda, typically for consideration. And so, Biden is doing Obama's bidding. He is clearly a proxy. He's not really a partner because he is subordinate to the president, and he's not a plant because he is fully attributed. We understand who he is and where he is. We can spot him, unlike, say, W.N. Bilbo, played by James Spader, who was very much a shadowy backroom figure.
Mm-hmm. All right, Alan Kelly with us again, the Playmaker Systems CEO and founder, and we're talking about the plays being run and characteristics that maybe are similar to what you might have seen if you did see the movie Lincoln. If you didn't, it's still interesting history. And in this case, let's talk about The Recast, which is a play that, what would you just say, it's sort of recharacterizing, reframing in some ways.
That's right. It's maybe self-evident. It's
right.
The reinterpretation of an action, event, information, or symbol, and it's a framing play. There's a lot that's been discussed over the years about framing in politics. Well, there's 4 or 5 different specific stratagems underneath that concept, and there was a brilliant example of a recast that occurred when the Copperheads, in particular, in the movie Lincoln, were calling to understand if indeed a peace mission was coming from the South. They shot a note out to Lincoln, Daniel Day-Lewis, who shot back, said, well, to my knowledge, no one from the South is in Washington to offer peace. Well, he knew they were on their way, but he told Ulysses S. Grant to keep him in Virginia. So, he was truthful, but only to a degree. So he was recasting the information for his political advantage. Mm. Now, I think an analogy, a modern analogy might, say, be Grover Norquist, the no tax pledge guy, who, even though the super rich were finally, soaked, he was able to say to his broader constituency, hey, we succeeded in the aggregate.
Mm-hmm. I see. So, in other words, we still kept our pledge to most Americans.
That's right. Or on net,
yeah,
we still did right.
Yeah. Well, actually, and not to go too far afield of our discussion here, but in a way, they've set it up so it'd be very difficult to come back and say, well, now we need to worry about taxes, more taxes on people who make over a certain amount of money, because we just sort of fought that battle, didn't we?
Yeah, we have the fiscal cliff trilogy. We just played out the first of the 3.
Yeah, well, now they're moguls. Because it's like going down a ski slope, just slowly but surely. But I look at it that way seriously because, now there's been discussion about where we're going to get more revenue. I heard Dick Durbin, senator from Illinois, yesterday on CNN, and he was talking with Candy Crowley about possibility of doing certain things that maybe could raise more revenue. And he talked about, transportation investment. And, we've paid for that with a gas tax. We really don't want to raise gasoline taxes right now on individuals. And I think that the question is going to be, where do you start raising taxes without touching those people that supposedly were just protected? And either Republicans or Democrats or both are either going to have to go back on that, or they're going to have some serious discussions about where they're going to cut spending. Just to take from the argument anyway, because it's hard to go back and say, well, we won this battle, now let's fight it again.
What happens as you go through if you look at this from the perspective of this system of plays or influence strategies, generally when you start a new negotiation or a new debate, you begin to assess, and then you condition, and then you engage. And what you're describing now is the beginning of a new phase. And so the players are on the left side of this spectrum, not politically, but they're assessing, and they're in what you just described is a play called a trial balloon, where they're lofting ideas, they're sensing people, they're taking the temperature of certain constituencies to see if a particular idea might fly.
Mm-hmm. One other play that is predominant or prominent in the movie, and this is in the person of Thaddeus Stevens, who's played by Tommy Lee Jones, and this is something we hear all about in Washington, D.C. and see it all the time, The Call Out. And what do you call it? You call it the who's prone to pull down a rival's pants. So, paddle it a little bit. That's a frequent technique in Washington.
Yeah, well, the more proper definition is the mockery or moral indignation directed at a player or its position. But in this case, Tommy Lee Jones stands up, the bewigged character, and he says to somebody, I can't recall, it might have been the Copperheads. He says, slavery is the only insult to natural law, you famous nincompoop. And so it's certainly a call out.
I would love to hear somebody call someone a fatuous nincompoop today. I just don't know how well it would play, but.
Yeah.
But it does get its play. I mean, these call-outs happen all the time. Or, well, enthralled to Grover Norquist. You know, you slave to the Norquist, the throne. You know, whatever they'd say, the altar of the Americans for Tax Reform. That kind of call-out often was being thrown out by Democrats.
Right. Now, I would say that in the modern era, the call-out is not nearly so eloquent. We had John Boehner do a double F-bomb on Harry Reid.
Was that a call-out, though, because it wasn't in public?
Sure. Just because something is not in public doesn't mean it's not an influence strategy.
True.
And but I guess the point here, or the intrigue to me as a teacher and a studier of these things, is that influence strategies certainly live now, and they certainly lived then, and that there's, for better or for worse, there's a time-honored tradition. Whether you're a schemer or whether you're a well-meaning lawmaker, influence strategies happen, and everyone runs plays on you, with you, by you, and for you.
And as a strategist, I would just ask you, with our 1 minute left or so with our conversation, this idea of the trial balloons, if you want to use that for the name of Susan Rice, and then eventually settling on John Kerry, the trial balloon of Chuck Hagel, we saw it. We also saw one for Michelle Flournoy, very briefly for Secretary of Defense for these cabinet nominations. Are those successful plays for the president? Are those wise plays? What's your assessment of that?
Well, the beauty of a trial balloon is that it is a play that you can run with a back door. You can test the waters, and if there's a certain amount of objection to it, you can move on or move out with too much consequence. Mm-hmm. But if you go out and you declare that Chuck Hagel is the guy, or, well, it's in this case Susan Rice. Susan Rice is the person for your nomination. If you do something too declaratory, then you leave yourself no room. And that's the beauty of assessing plays.
Trial balloons are cheap, and they are expendable.
Well, and they're everywhere, floating above every building in D.C.
Absolutely.
Including the White House.
Alan Kelly, of course, always a pleasure to have you. And we'll post all the info on our Facebook page if you want to catch up with where Alan's writing and so on. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tim.